There was a moment in my life when everything looked fine from the outside, but inside, I was collapsing. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, nothing explosive, nothing cinematic. No one saw it happening. No one even suspected anything was wrong. I still smiled, still worked, still kept up the appearance of having it all under control. But quietly, silently, my life was drifting into a place I didn't recognize. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I was already behind. Every night, I went to bed feeling like I had accomplished nothing. It didn't matter how hard I worked, I felt stuck, drained, overwhelmed, and painfully disconnected from who I used to be. It felt like walking through life on autopilot, as if I was technically alive, but not really living. And one morning, a morning that started like any other, something inside me snapped. Not in a loud way, but in a whisper. A whisper that said, "I can't keep living like this." I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know where to start. All I knew was this: something had to change. Or I was going to lose myself completely. That morning would become the beginning of the biggest transformation of my life, a transformation built not from grand gestures, not from impossible routines, not from perfectly curated self-improvement hacks, but from 5 simple daily habits that rebuilt me piece by piece, day by day, life back into life. But before I discovered those habits, I had to confront the truth I had avoided for years. It started in the kitchen, a place that used to feel warm, familiar, comforting. Now it felt empty. My coffee sat untouched on the counter. The sunlight coming through the window felt foreign, distant. I leaned against the sink, staring at a life that looked functional but felt completely hollow. I wasn't burned out. I wasn't depressed. At least, not in the dramatic sense. I was unfulfilled, quietly, steadily, deeply. It's the kind of feeling that creeps in through the smallest cracks. The kind that doesn't break you instantly, it wears you down slowly. You don't notice it until one day you wake up and realize you've been surviving, not living. Existing, not growing. Breathing, but not truly alive. That realization hit me harder than any failure ever had. I had dreams, goals, ambitions, but they were buried under stress, distractions, and habits that drained me instead of building me. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask: when did I stop showing up for my own life? The answer was uncomfortable. It wasn't one moment, it was hundreds of small moments. The nights I stayed up too late scrolling through my phone because I didn't want to face my thoughts. The mornings I snoozed my alarm because I didn't have a reason to get up. The meals I skipped because I was too busy. The days I worked without purpose. The doubts I silenced instead of understanding them. The goals I postponed until after things settled down. The person I used to be, slipping further away. My life hadn't collapsed, I had drifted away from it. And I realized something powerful: success doesn't disappear in an instant. It decays, quietly, slowly, through daily habits. If bad habits could quietly destroy my life, maybe good habits could quietly rebuild it. But I didn't know which habits. Or where to begin. Or how to even take the first step. All I knew was that I couldn't wait for motivation, inspiration, or the perfect plan. If I wanted a different life, I needed to change the little things, the things I did every day, not the things I did once in a while. I walked to the living room, grabbed an old notebook, and sat on the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't write goals. I didn't write tasks. I didn't write a perfect routine. I wrote one question: what does a better version of me actually do every day? At first, nothing came to mind. But slowly, painfully, honestly, I started writing. Habits I once had. Habits I admired in others. Habits that aligned with the person I wanted to become. I didn't know it then, but those scribbles would grow into the 5 daily habits that transformed my entire life. 5 habits that turned survival into growth. Confusion into clarity. Emptiness into purpose. Autopilot into awareness. chaos into momentum. 5 habits that rebuilt my identity from the inside out. 5 habits that, without exaggeration, helped me rediscover who I was and who I could become. But transformation never begins with confidence. It begins with honesty. And that honesty came from a moment of painful realization: nothing was going to change until I did. That morning, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel motivated. I didn't feel ready. I just felt tired of ignoring my life. And in that exhaustion, something unexpected happened. I decided to try. Not perfectly. Not ambitiously. Not dramatically. Just try. And that tiny decision became the first step toward a new life, a life shaped by 5 habits I had no idea would transform me completely. But the truth is, I didn't discover all 5 at once. The first habit found me in the most unexpected way, on a walk I didn't even want to take. I didn't plan to go outside that day. Honestly, I didn't plan to do anything at all. After writing that single question in my notebook, what does a better version of me actually do every day? I stared at the page until the words blurred. I felt exposed. Seen, but not by anyone else. Seen by myself. And sometimes, seeing yourself clearly is the hardest part. My mind was foggy. My thoughts loud and scattered. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. I needed air, space, something. So I put on my shoes, not with enthusiasm, not with intention, but simply because staying inside felt heavier than stepping out. The moment I opened my front door, the world greeted me with a kind of silence I didn't know I needed. No traffic. No noise. Just a quiet street, soft morning light, and a cool breeze that carried a hint of something I hadn't felt in months: relief. I didn't walk with purpose. I didn't choose a direction. I simply moved. One step. Then another. And another. And something strange began to happen. With every step, my mind opened up a little. My chest loosened a little. The fog lifted just a little. Not much. But enough to notice. After a few minutes, I reached a small park near my building, a place I'd passed 100 times but never entered. That morning, without thinking, I walked inside. The moment my foot touched the path, something shifted in me. The trees, the birds, the rustling leaves, it felt like the world was breathing, and for the first time in a long time, I started breathing with it. And that's when it happened, the moment that sparked habit. I sat on a bench under a broad, gentle tree. No phone. No music. No distractions. Just me. Me, and the thoughts I'd been avoiding. At first, they attacked me: guilt, pressure, regret, fear. But as the minutes passed, something changed. Instead of panicking, I simply watched them. Watched the fear. Watched the doubts. Watched the old stories playing on repeat. And in the stillness of that moment, I realized something: my life wasn't destroyed by big failures. It was eroded by small, unconscious habits, like ignoring myself. The world had gotten loud. My mind had gotten cluttered. My life had gotten fast. But in that quiet space, sitting alone on a worn-down bench, I understood the truth clearly: if I wanted to transform my life, I needed to reconnect with my inner world first. And right there, in that raw, unexpected moment, I discovered the first habit that would change everything. Habit, the 10-minute presence reset, a daily walk or pause without a phone, just me in reality. It sounds simple. Almost too simple. But simplicity is deceptive. Simplicity saves lives. Because in that moment of stillness, I realized something about myself: I hadn't been present for years. I wasn't living life, I was reacting to it. Every second of my day was filled with noise, distraction, screens, rushing, thinking, worrying, planning, comparing, everything except being. And without presence, even the most beautiful life feels empty. So I made a promise to myself: every day, I would take 10 minutes, minimum, to simply exist. No phone. No goals. No productivity. Just presence. The next day, I walked again. Early. Quiet. Slow. And again, something changed. My mind wasn't as loud. My chest wasn't as tight. My thoughts weren't as chaotic. For the first time in a very long time, I could hear myself clearly. And that simple whisper of inner clarity became the foundation for every transformation that followed. Because presence doesn't just calm you. It reveals you. It tells you what you need. What you fear. What you avoid. What you desire. What you must face. Presence is the doorway to truth. And inside that truth, I began to see exactly what needed to change in my life. But the biggest change happened on day 3. I was sitting again on that same park bench when a thought surged through me, a thought that startled me, because I hadn't felt it in months. I want to get better. Not I should. Not I have to. Not I'm supposed to. I wanted to. And that feeling, that tiny spark of desire, was enough to ignite the next massive shift in my life. Because presence creates space. And in that space, growth takes root. It was during one of those quiet 10-minute resets, watching the sunlight wrap around tree branches, that another realization hit me: clarity means nothing unless you act on it. And that's when I discovered the second habit. The habit that would turn my quiet reflection into real, tangible change. A habit born not from motivation, but from a moment of honest self-awareness that said, if I don't hold myself accountable gently, I'll slip right back into the life I'm trying to escape. And that next habit would become the backbone of everything I achieved afterward. Because habit, presence, awakened something inside me. But habit. Habit made me unstoppable. Presence woke me up. But presence alone didn't change my life. It created awareness, but not direction. It gave me clarity, but not movement. Because once you finally see your life clearly, once you stop running long enough to understand what's actually happening inside you, a new problem appears. Now that I know what's wrong, what do I do next? That question haunted me. I had spent years letting life happen to me, drifting, reacting, numbing, distracting. So even when I began waking up, even when I started reconnecting with myself through those quiet 10-minute presence resets, I still didn't know how to turn awareness into action. And that's when I realized something important: clarity without accountability changes nothing. One morning, about a week after I started my daily walks, I returned home and sat on the floor of my living room again, that same old notebook in front of me. But this time, something felt different. My mind wasn't foggy. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't feel lost. I felt ready. Not for a big transformation. Just ready to take ownership of my next step. I opened the notebook and saw the question I had written on that first painful day: what does a better version of me actually do every day? My eyes lingered on those words. They didn't scare me anymore. They didn't make me feel guilty. They pulled me in. I flipped to a blank page and, without planning, without forcing it, without trying to be impressive, I wrote, what can I do today to move one closer to that version of me? Just 1%. Not a leap. Not a breakthrough. Not a perfect routine. Just one small shift. But as soon as my pen stopped moving, another thought hit me with a force I couldn't ignore: if I don't track my growth, my mind will convince me I'm not growing at all. Because the brain forgets wins. It forgets progress. It forgets effort. It remembers failures. It remembers mistakes. It remembers reasons to stay the same. And that was the moment I discovered habit, the habit that would become the backbone of my transformation. Habit, the one daily accountability page. Every day, I write one tiny victory, even the smallest one. A single line. 10 seconds. No pressure. No perfection. No judgment. Just proof. Proof that I showed up. Proof that I tried. Proof that I was becoming someone new one tiny inch at a time. I didn't write goals. I didn't write tasks. I didn't write long reflections. Just one sentence. Some days, it was something simple like, took a walk instead of scrolling. Drank enough water today. Did 10 minutes of reading. Cooked my own breakfast. Didn't talk negatively to myself once. On other days, it was deeper, wrote a page in my journal and cried. Said no to something I didn't want. Did a task I've been avoiding for months. Caught myself before spiraling. Showed kindness to a stranger. These weren't accomplishments. They were reminders. Grounding moments. Tiny anchors that kept me from drifting back into the old version of myself. And something incredible happened. After just 1 week of writing a single one victory every day, I began to feel different. More aware. More confident. More stable. More intentional. It didn't feel like much at the time. But here's the truth I learned: success doesn't come from massive action. It comes from consistent identity shifts stacked quietly, day after day. And each one entry shifted my identity. Each sentence strengthened a new inner narrative, one that said, I am someone who tries. I am someone who shows up. I am someone who improves, even if no one sees it. I am someone who does not quit on myself. This tiny habit didn't just change my behavior. It changed the way I saw myself. And when you change the way you see yourself, you change the way you show up for your life. But the real breakthrough happened on a night that felt painfully ordinary. I was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. It was the kind of exhaustion that whispers, skip it. Do it tomorrow. One day won't matter. The old me would have listened. But as I was about to go to bed, I saw my notebook lying open on my desk. And something inside me refused to leave that page blank. So I sat down and wrote the smallest possible win: today, I didn't give up. And that sentence broke something open inside me. Because it was true. All day long, even if I didn't do anything extraordinary. I didn't abandon myself. I didn't quit on my journey. I didn't let the old version of me win. I didn't fall back into the shadows of who I used to be. I showed up, imperfectly, quietly, honestly. And that was enough. That moment made me realize something that would rewire the way I approached my entire life. The days you feel least motivated are the days your one wins matter the most. Anyone can improve when they feel good. Anyone can be disciplined on their best days. But the person you become, the person who rises, grows, transforms, is built on the days that challenge you most. And that is when I understood something that would lead me to the next massive shift in my transformation. Presence gives you clarity. Accountability gives you direction. But there was still something missing, the force that fuels momentum. A force I didn't discover until one uncomfortable, painful realization hit me like a punch to the chest. I was living my life mentally drained because I was physically abandoned by myself. And that realization led me toward the third habit, a habit that would rebuild my energy, my confidence, and my identity, from the ground up. It's strange how the body keeps score long after the mind stops paying attention. I had been working on my presence. I had been building my one daily accountability. I was finally beginning to feel like I was waking up from a long, heavy sleep. But something still felt off. I couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't emotional fog that was lifting. It wasn't mental overwhelm that was easing. It wasn't confusion, clarity was slowly returning. It was something deeper. A kind of dull, steady fatigue that followed me everywhere. Not exhaustion, more like emptiness. As if my mind was trying, but my body was lagging behind. And one afternoon, I understood why. I had just finished writing my tiny one win for the day when I stood up from my chair and realized my legs felt weak. My shoulders stiff. My back tight. My breath shallow. It felt like my body belonged to someone who had lived a different life, someone who never moved, someone who carried invisible weight on their bones, someone who hadn't been taken care of in a long time. Which was true. I hadn't taken care of myself physically in years. Not intentionally, but neglect is a quiet thing. It sneaks up on you until one day you realize you're tired for no reason. You're slow for no reason. You're drained for no reason. Except there was a reason. I had abandoned the part of me that carried me through life. And that day, it hit me with painful clarity: you cannot transform your mind while leaving your body behind. Mental clarity was helping, but my body was starving for attention. So that evening, I did something very small, something embarrassingly easy, something gentle. I rolled out an old exercise mat I hadn't touched in years. It smelled like dust and nostalgia. A reminder of the version of me who once cared enough to move. I sat down, stretched my legs forward, and reached for my toes. I barely touched my shins. The old me would have felt ashamed. But the new me just breathed. Then I did something ridiculously simple: I stretched. For 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Nothing fancy. Nothing intense. Nothing painful. Just slow, careful movement. Loosening joints I had ignored. Releasing tension I didn't know I was holding. Waking up muscles that had been asleep alongside my dreams. And something unexpected happened. When I stood up, I felt lighter. Not physically. Emotionally. Because taking care of the body is an act of respect toward the self. And that night, I realized something big: if presence connects you to your mind, and accountability connects you to your actions, then movement connects you to your life force. And that was the spark that led to Habit, the 5-minute body activation, a daily micro-movement routine: stretch, breathe, move, no excuses, no intensity. 5 minutes. Every day. Anywhere. Not a workout. Not exercise. Not training. Just movement. Some days it was stretching. Some days a short walk. Some days a few squats. Sometimes I just lay on the floor and breathed deeply, letting my chest rise and fall with intention instead of rushing through life. And the change was immediate. Not dramatic, but undeniable. My energy rose. My mood stabilized. My tension dropped. My breathing slowed. My posture improved. My mind felt sharper. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel alive in my own skin again. Because the human body wasn't designed for stagnation. Stillness is death to energy. Movement is fuel. And with each tiny 5-minute activation, I began to rebuild trust in myself: trust that I could show up, trust that I could take care of myself, trust that I could commit to something, trust that I was worthy of feeling good again. But I didn't realize how powerful this habit was until one morning, about 2 weeks in. I woke up tired and emotionally flat. The kind of morning that used to spiral me into a day of feeling like a failure. But this time, something different happened. My body, without thinking, moved. My hands pushed the covers aside. My feet touched the floor. My spine stretched upward. And within seconds, I was on the mat, stretching into my routine, automatically. It wasn't discipline. It wasn't motivation. It wasn't self-control. It was identity. I had become someone who moves. And that identity began to seep into everything. I walked more. I sat straighter. I breathed deeper. I felt lighter. My mind became clearer. My decisions became better. My confidence began to return. But that wasn't the biggest effect. The biggest effect was this: movement opened the door to momentum. Not physical momentum, life momentum. Because once your body wakes up, your possibilities wake up too. And that shift launched me straight into habit, the habit that didn't just transform my life, it expanded it. A habit born from a simple realization: energy is useless if you don't give it a direction. And the direction I found came from a place I had neglected my entire life. A place inside me that had been waiting for years to finally be heard. By this point in my journey, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't healed. I wasn't transformed. I wasn't living a perfect life. But I was no longer dissolving into my own days. Presence was giving me clarity. My one page was giving me direction. Movement was giving me energy. But something was still missing, something subtle, something quiet, something I had ignored for nearly my entire life. It took me a long time to understand what it was. It wasn't discipline. It wasn't drive. It wasn't ambition. It was something deeper. My mind was awake. My body was awake. But my purpose was still asleep. Not purpose in the dramatic sense people talk about, not destiny, not mission, not legacy. I mean the simple, personal, everyday purpose that gives your day meaning. The kind of purpose that makes you feel connected to yourself. The kind that makes you want to grow. The kind that reminds you why the small habits matter. And I didn't realize I lacked this until one quiet evening. I was sitting at my desk, writing my one win of the day, when my hand suddenly froze mid-sentence. I stared at the page. The notebook was filled with tiny daily victories. Progress. Consistency. Effort. But something about it felt empty. Not meaningless, just incomplete. Because I was improving myself, but I wasn't expressing myself. I had been surviving for so long that I forgot what it felt like to create something that belonged to me. Something with my fingerprints on it. Something that lived outside my mind. Something that connected me to the world beyond routines. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't doing anything that fed my soul. I had hobbies once. Passions. Things that made me feel alive. Things that made me lose track of time. Things that made me feel connected to who I was and who I could be. But in the chaos of life, I had given all of them up. Not intentionally. Not out of laziness. But because growth felt like a luxury I no longer deserved. And that moment, that quiet moment of truth, became the catalyst for the next habit. A habit that didn't just change my days, it restored the part of me that burnout had buried. Habit, the one page of growth ritual. Every day, I engage in one small act of personal expansion: reading, journaling, learning, or creating. Just one page. One page of a book. One page of journaling. One page of ideas. One page of learning notes. One page of writing, sketching, planning, visualizing, anything that expanded my inner world. It didn't matter what form it took. It didn't matter how long it lasted. It didn't matter how productive it was. What mattered was this: I was feeding my mind with growth instead of noise. The effects were almost immediate. Something inside me began to stretch awake. A spark. A curiosity. A sense of possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't just repairing myself, I was evolving. And the beauty of this habit was in its simplicity. One page is never intimidating. One page is never overwhelming. One page is always enough. But one page leads to another. And another. And another. Before long, I was reading again. I was learning again. I was thinking differently. I was reconnecting with my curiosity. I was becoming someone I hadn't met in a very long time. Not a better person. A fuller person. A person with depth, insight, vision. Because growth isn't just about achievement. Growth is the oxygen of the soul. And once this habit took root, transformation accelerated. I didn't feel stuck anymore. I didn't feel lost anymore. I didn't feel directionless every morning. For the first time, I felt like my life had texture. But here's where the story takes its turn. Even though I was growing, healing, and improving, there was one last part of me that remained locked away. A part that no one saw. A part that carried every insecurity, every mistake, every fear I'd avoided for years. A part that wasn't healed by reading, walking, writing, stretching, or tracking progress. A part one would finally have to confront. And that confrontation would lead me directly to habit, the habit that didn't just transform my life, it freed me. It happened on a night I almost skipped my one-page ritual. A night when the past I'd been avoiding finally caught up with me. A night that forced me to face the truth of why I had drifted, why I had collapsed, and why I had lost myself in the first place. A night that taught me the most powerful lesson of all: a transformed life means nothing if you don't transform the relationship you have with yourself. There is a moment in every long journey where the progress you've made confronts the pain you've avoided. Presence gave me clarity. Accountability gave me direction. Movement gave me energy. Growth gave me expansion. My life was changing, slowly, steadily, beautifully. But inside, there was still a room I hadn't opened. A room I was afraid of. A room I pretended didn't exist. And it didn't show itself during the good days. It revealed itself on an ordinary night, the kind of night where fatigue feels heavier than usual, where thoughts move slowly, where the world feels slightly out of focus. I had every intention of doing my one page of growth ritual. Just one page. 10 minutes at most. But that night, I felt resistance, thick, heavy resistance, the kind that makes your chest tighten for no logical reason. Still, I pushed through. I opened my notebook, ready to write a few lines, when suddenly, without warning, a memory hit me. Something I hadn't thought about in years. Something I had buried so deeply I didn't even recognize the feeling at first. It wasn't a dramatic trauma. It wasn't a loud pain. It was a quiet moment of old shame, the kind that hides in the corners of your mind, shaping you from the shadows. A small failure. A mistake I never forgave myself for. A version of me I still carried guilt over. And as I sat there, pen in hand, it all came back: the self-criticism, the disappointment in myself, the feeling that I wasn't good enough, that I was behind, that I was failing at life because of mistakes I made years ago. I hadn't realized how much it still controlled me. How much it shaped my decisions. How much it affected the way I spoke to myself every day. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I understood my biggest enemy wasn't burnout. It wasn't fear. It wasn't lack of discipline. It wasn't lack of clarity. It wasn't even lack of purpose. It was the voice in my own head. The voice that judged me, punished me, shamed me, belittled me, blamed me, compared me, restricted me, held me hostage to past versions of myself. All my life, I thought I needed more motivation. But what I truly needed was forgiveness. Not from others. From myself. And right there, in the middle of that quiet, emotionally raw night, I discovered the final habit. The habit that freed me from the inside out. Habit, the nightly self-compassion reflection, a simple 2 to 3 minute ritual of asking myself one question: what do I forgive myself for today? It felt strange at first. Uncomfortable. Even wrong. Forgive myself? For what? But I wrote it anyway. That night, my answer was, I forgive myself for not being perfect. And when I wrote it, something inside me cracked, but in a good way. A release. a letting go. The next night, I forgive myself for needing rest. Another night, I forgive myself for taking longer than I expected. Another, I forgive myself for the mistakes I made when I didn't know better. Another, I forgive myself for comparing my life to others. Another, I forgive myself for who I was when I was hurting. And slowly, beautifully, my inner world began to soften. The guilt I carried loosened. The shame dissolved. The pressure lifted. The self-hate faded. Because here's the truth I had been running from my entire life: you cannot build a better life while hating the person living it. Self-criticism destroys transformation. Self-compassion fuels it. I had spent years punishing myself for not being who I wanted to be. But transformation isn't punishment. It's healing. It's acceptance. It's choosing to love yourself into a better life, not forcing yourself into one. And this final habit, these tiny nightly moments of forgiveness, did something the other 4 habits couldn't: it rewired my identity at the deepest emotional level. Because when you forgive yourself, you stop fearing mistakes. You stop procrastinating out of shame. You stop sabotaging your progress. You stop running from your potential. You stop living in your past. And most importantly, you create space for the person you are becoming. Over the next weeks, everything shifted. My presence deepened. My accountability became natural. My energy rose. My growth accelerated. My self-respect blossomed. But the biggest change was this: I became kind to myself. And that changed everything. Because a kind mind is a powerful mind. A forgiving heart is a courageous heart. A compassionate self is an unstoppable self. And somewhere along this journey, without forcing it, without rushing it, without chasing it, my life transformed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Not in the way I once imagined. It changed quietly. Gently. Steadily. The same way the sun rises, soft at first, barely noticeable, then suddenly bright and undeniable. But there was still one final moment, one final scene, that brought all 5 habits together in a way I never expected. A moment that showed me just how far I'd come. And how much of my old life I had left behind forever. It happened on a morning that should have been completely ordinary. Nothing special. No breakthrough. No sudden burst of inspiration. Just a quiet sunrise, a warm cup of tea, and a calmness in my chest that felt new, but also strangely familiar. I sat by the window, the same window I used to stare through when life felt heavy, when the world looked dim, when I felt disconnected from myself. But on this morning, instead of feeling numb, I felt present. Steady. Alive. It didn't feel like transformation. It felt like a soft beginning, like my life was finally breathing again. I opened my notebook, ready to write my one win for the day, a habit that had become as natural as brushing my teeth. But as I looked at the pages, something caught my eye. Something strange. Something I hadn't noticed until that very moment. A pattern. Not in my words. Not in my progress. Not in my habits. In my handwriting. The early pages were frantic letters pressed hard into the paper, jagged strokes, rushed words. The handwriting of someone who was overwhelmed. Someone who was drowning. Someone who was trying to hold their life together with shaking hands. But as the pages continued, something changed. The letters softened. The spacing widened. The ink became smoother. The pressure lighter. It was like watching myself heal, through ink. And as I flipped to the most recent pages, the ones filled with presence, wins, movement, growth, and forgiveness, I saw a version of myself I didn't recognize. Not because this version was new, but because this version was the real me, the me I had forgotten. As that realization washed over me, I felt something inside me unravel in the best possible way. Because in that moment, I understood something profound: these 5 habits didn't transform my life. They returned me to myself. Transformation wasn't becoming someone new. Transformation was remembering who I was before the world dimmed my light. Before responsibilities buried my joy. Before pressure took my clarity. Before burnout stole my spark. Before fear became my compass. These habits didn't add something to me. They removed everything that was blocking me. They stripped away my numbness, my exhaustion, my negative self-talk, my shame, my stagnation, my self-abandonment. They uncovered what had been waiting underneath for years, me. And that was the twist. I didn't change my life. I came home to it. But the story doesn't end in a poetic moment by the window. It ends with a test, one final test, a moment that showed me exactly how much I had grown. About a month later, I received news that would have destroyed the old me. A project I had worked on for weeks fell apart. A plan I was relying on collapsed. An opportunity one was counting on disappeared overnight. Old me would have spiraled. Old me would have blamed myself, doubted myself, punished myself. Old me would have disappeared into avoidance, fear, and shame. But this time, something different happened. The moment I felt the panic rising, I paused. Presence. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and grounded myself in the moment instead of letting fear take over. Then I opened my notebook. One accountability. I wrote a tiny win, handled a setback without breaking. Then I rolled out my mat. Movement. I stretched slowly, letting my body release the tension instead of letting it pile up in my chest. After that, I read one page of a book that inspired me. Growth. And finally, before bed, I wrote the sentence I needed most: I forgive myself for things outside my control. Self-compassion. In 20 minutes, I moved through all 5 habits, not perfectly, not dramatically, but instinctively. Not to escape the setback. Not to deny reality. Not to force positivity. But to stay grounded inside myself instead of collapsing into who I used to be. And that's when it hit me: the true power of habits isn't what they do for you on good days, but who they allow you to become on bad days. These habits didn't just change my life. They made me resilient, centered, capable, calm. They made me unbreakable in a quiet, grounded way. Not because life got easier, but because I became stronger from the inside out. Today, my life isn't perfect. But it's mine. Fully, honestly, beautifully mine. And every day, without fail, I return to these 5 habits. 1. Presence, 10 minutes of stillness and reality. 2. Accountability, 1 daily 1 win. 3. Movement, 5 minutes of activation. 4. Growth, 1 page of expansion. 5. Self-compassion, forgiveness every night. They aren't habits. They're lifelines. Anchors. Guiding lights. Soft reminders of who I am and who I'm becoming. And when I look back now, the biggest twist of all is this: changing your life doesn't require strength. It requires softness. Soft beginnings. Soft steps. Soft forgiveness. Soft returns to yourself. That's how transformation happens, not in loud bursts, but in quiet daily moments of choosing to rise again. 1 breath. 1 page. 1 movement. 1 win. 1 forgiveness at a time. And that is how 5 daily habits completely transformed my life.